Welcome to a very special Retail Cannabis Forum edition of The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada and sponsored by Environics Analytics. Environics Analytics helps companies in retail, CPG, and the cannabis industry turn data and analytics into insights, strategy, and results. EA produces Cannabis Insights, the market-leading source of neighborhood-level insights for the cannabis industry. This podcast is intended for listeners 18+. First up, recorded live on the main stage in the Toronto Reference Library event space, closing off RCC's Retail Cannabis Forum, my one-to-one interview with Hightide CEO Raj Grover, an experienced cannabis industry veteran and retailer. We talk about the inspiration to move to Alberta to get a start in the industry, what it will take to regain momentum in Ontario, and the path ahead for Hightide in 2020 and beyond. Next, Lauren Davie, Director of Retail for Superette, joins me in the Environics Analytics podcasting studio for a great conversation covering her rich retail background, the importance of training and a training culture, and how the innovation Superette has brought in format, approach, all come together on the front lines with an award-winning performance by Superette's brand and people. Lastly, Michelle Sexsmith, Senior Vice President and Practice Leader from Environics Analytics, is back on The Voice of Retail, telling us how their core set of tools and insights can inform cannabis retailers around consumption patterns, new trends, and making smart decisions on store location and assortment with data. So let's start now with my interview with Raj from Hightide. All right, so as you can see, I'm going to record our interview for the Voice of Retail podcast. So you're all going to be on a podcast. Let's hear it for being a live audience and up our day. And thanks to my sponsors, Environics Analytics, for sponsoring our podcast studio today.
Absolutely.
So welcome. I couldn't think of a better way to kind of end off our afternoon talking about retail cannabis. Veteran in the industry, so let's start off with some of the basics. So let's start off with your personal and professional journey. I think it goes back to 2009.
That's right.
So talk about a real veteran. So take us through a little bit of that up to where we are and where the business is today.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me, first of all. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story. I'll go a little bit further back than that to just give a little bit on my background. So born and brought up in India, come from a family of traders. My grandfather was a domestic trader in India. My dad specialized in food products that he exported to Southeast Asia. And so I had exposure to business, international business early on, working with my father. When I came to Canada, I was 20 and a half years old. And at 21, I started my first business, which was a small retail store in Niagara Falls, Canada. Yeah. And, I sold fashion accessories at that time. I built that business into 3 stores and started a distribution business in the fashion accessory space. In 2007, moved to Alberta. Oil was at everybody's mind at that time, not so much.
That's what took you to Alberta, the opportunity?
The opportunity, we used to get a lot of customers in Niagara Falls and Grand Bend, and they would come and spend 3 times the money than Ontarians would, and they were like, we don't get this stuff there. So decided to make a move to Alberta and started with my fashion accessories distribution business in Alberta. And on one of my business trips in India, where I was buying body jewelry in New Delhi, I came across a vendor that was actually selling hand-blown glass pipes and water pipes by the kilo, not by the piece. So it was, and I had a little bit of idea on what the accessories were. Had not tried marijuana at that time and had not used a water pipe at that time, but being in Niagara Falls and Grand Bend, which are touristy places, I had a little bit of an idea of what smoking accessory was. So I sent a small shipment back home from India to Canada, came back and almost immediately sold it overnight. And that's when I decided I should be in the smoking accessories industry.
Right on.
So 2009, I started my first smoking accessories shop, which is called Smoker's Corner. It was only 500 square feet. Started it with $48,000. Organically took that business to 19 stores all over Canada. So I had 16 in Alberta, 2 in British Columbia, 1 in Nova Scotia. 9 of them were franchised and 10 were corporate. And 2011 founded my wholesale business, which is RGR Canada, so selling smoking accessories to other retailers on top of Smoker's Corner. Yeah. 2016, I co-founded Famous Brands, which specializes in branded smoking accessories. So we have partnerships with Snoop Dogg, Trailer Park Boys, Paramount Pictures, Lionsgate Studios, Guns N' Roses.
So got into the licensed products.
That's right. So licensed branded paraphernalia is what Famous Brands does. And then when Alberta signaled that they are going to go the private route, and we had 16 Smokers Corner accessory shops in Alberta, I decided to vend all of the businesses, including the newly formed Canna Cabana at that time, into the parent company that's called Hightide today, and took it to CSC. So we're listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange, as well as the OTC and the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. So that's sort of the beginning of Hightide.
What a great body of experience. So let's focus the lens on Canna Cabana, just south of here, location just not too far south of here. So tell us about the concept. I've had the pleasure of having Andy Halalis on the podcast before. I talked to Andy, and
Andy's very passionate.
He's very passionate, and he talked about the vision behind what that brand would be. But I want to hear from you how you started the genesis of that brand and how you brought it together and what it is today.
So, having done business with the exact same customer for over a decade with Smokers Corner, it's the same customers that are buying water pipes, vaporizers, rolling papers. It's the same customers that are buying cannabis. So we knew our customer really, really well. And we knew the demographic, the average income, what they like, what their preferences are, the type of accessories they use. And because we were in the mix of things, it was not just a capital markets idea for us to go public and then implement the strategy. We had a strategy in mind, and it was kind of continuing from the Smokers Corner world into the Canna Cabana brand that we created. So from the store concept, the brand design, the layout, and everything else in between, it took us about a year to finish it. I think I started in November 2017 and completed the brand just before we rolled out our first store in October 2018. So that was sort of the beginning of the Canna Cabana culture. And it was designed keeping in mind our core customer that we've serviced for the last 10 years. So we were very well educated on the customer. And it was sort of a no-brainer. It was a natural and an automatic progression to come from Smokers Corner and transition that into Canna Cabana. Alberta was always the most progressive province in Canada with the most open sort of retail system. And because we had 16 stores, we ended up converting 6 stores from Smokers Corner, changing them into Canna Cabana. I could not convert more because of the guidelines of distance requirements, etc. But today we have 29 stores across Canada.
23 provinces, I think, right?
That's correct. So we operate in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario. In Ontario, we have 3 lottery winners we partnered up with, which is Hamilton, Sudbury, and Toronto. We have 25 locations in Alberta. There's one opening on Thursday, I think. That'll be 30 locations, and one in Saskatchewan, and there's a few more in the pipeline coming soon.
And I remember the description of the brand was like, it should be like you're walking into the store and cracking open a can of beer.
That's right.
What I like about the brand and how clear you are about articulating it, it's like, as Kevin says, you don't need to be this large, supernatural, 100-plus stores to understand who you are. It's like, we're not going to go chase after a different point of arrival in terms of who the brand is. We know them. We've been doing business with them since 2009. We're not going to the super elite member. We know our audience, and we're going to develop a brand that serves that audience, right?
I did not want to reinvent the wheel and make the store look something else than what my original vision was. We had tasted success in Smokers Corner in the type of that customer-friendly brand that it is, and we had the same approach, and we wanted to create Canna Cabana as the one-stop shop of cannabis. So we're trying to just focus on our strategy where a customer comes in. How can we make their purchase a complete purchase? We don't want to send them to a smoke shop, to a convenience store after to buy a smoking pipe or rolling papers or vaporizers or dabbing accessories now with 2.0 coming in. So we try to provide them that one-stop experience, and it helps us quite a bit too to add our to the daily, to the average ticket, as well as provide a complete experience to the customer. So far, we've garnered some great customer reviews, and I feel that we're on the right track.
Yeah, it's a great retail experience. I'm very fond of it. I think and it's a nice segue into talking about your people, because I find the people in your stores deliver just a great experience. I'm very impressed by it. So talk about that a little bit, and how you, what are the characteristics you look for the associates in your store, and then how do you identify that great bud tender or associate in your store? I'm
really glad you're answering me a bud tender related question, because bud tenders are probably the most critical part of our customer focused, customer first Canna Cabana retail strategy. So, cannabis is like buying wine. You want to talk, you want to have that human interaction. Hey, what do you like? What was your experience like? You can shop anything on Amazon if you want all day, but you're not going to get that interaction. So our training program, I feel, Adam has a great program in the industry, and I was very impressed to hear what he had to say. Similar to Prairie Records, we put in a lot of emphasis on our bartender education and bartender training. It's a 5-day program that they have to pass with a 95% score, and it's a 5 all-day class. 5-day, 8 hours a day, all-day class that they must pass with 95%. Because we have a legacy business of smoking accessories that we try to pair with cannabis. So we want to provide that complete experience. So it's a 5-day program. They must ace with 95%, and then ongoing every month, they're quizzed and they must retain the 95% knowledge.
So they have to recertify. Wow,
that's true.
Intense.
Because when people are coming in, they're expecting us to deliver that unique experience, educate them on the product, educate them on the cannabis. And I think our bartenders are uniquely and very well positioned to have that interaction with our customers.
So they're clearly going to be knowledgeable. The 95% threshold says, I'm not going to know the features and benefits. I'm not going to know that knowledge. What about culture and attitude? How do do you look for curiosity? Do you look for people who are genuinely, are they past current users of the product? Like, what do you look for from a culture perspective?
So culture of Canna Cabana is based on 3 values. It's based on approachable, playful, and sophisticated. Our stores are beautiful. I'd like to think that they're gorgeous. We get a lot of compliments on our stores, but they're very, very approachable. It's like going to a sexy beach party. You're going there, you get greeted, and we're friends. We're just friends helping friends. That is what we try to deliver every single day in Canna Cabana. If you read some of our customer reviews, which I encourage everyone to do, it's actually details of customers talking about how I was greeted, how the eye contact happened, how they were on the ball, they were overly helpful in going, they were not pushy, they were keeping their eyes on what we had to say, and they were listening to us. So all of that really matters, and all of that is what brings together that complete Canna Cabana friendly experience that we put together.
Let's transition to some industry talk and talk about the current and future. So it's been a tough couple of weeks in the industry. That reminds me of that old Mike Tyson quote, everyone has a plan till I punch him in the face. Looking at the past couple of weeks in the industry, what's your prognosis? How do we get, if there's momentum to be regained in certain provinces, what's the path forward? What's your advice, and how are you thinking about the nation? Now, it's a big country.
Right.
Alberta is steaming along, and that was government policy pretty much from day one. They wanted to differentiate their economy, and they saw a clear path. I think they're one of the provinces that's leading. Other provinces are not. We're seeing some daylight. Ontario last week talked about a click and collect, which is a little bit of daylight.
That's right.
For Ontario. At the same time, New Brunswick is kind of deciding to go a different path. And Eric from Lift & Co. shared a picture from, he was in Montreal showing a picture of the hour-and-a-half lineup at a Quebec cannabis store. So,
crazy.
It is Soviet-style retailing practically. So, how do we regain the momentum in certain areas, and what's your prognosis, and how are your thoughts?
That's a great question. Legalization, the rollout of legalization has been quite the ride so far, at least for us as a company and everybody else that I see. And I think the biggest challenge that we're facing as a company and almost every retailer in the country is the provinces are so far apart in the regulations and the regulatory hurdles that we have to pass as a national retailer. Not only do we have to, keep up with the regulations, we have to maneuver now because the regulations keep on changing. It's completely different from Nova Scotia to British Columbia. Alberta being one of the most progressive in the country. We have 300 stores in Alberta, just over 300 stores in Alberta now for 4.2 million people. And up to a month ago, we had 24 operating locations in Ontario, which Hightide has, stake in 3 locations in Ontario. For 15 million people. So that just doesn't make sense. I think the whole idea of legalization was to take it away from the black market and to bring it into the legitimate market. And I think this needs to be this needs to be the agenda that's the forefront of every provincial strategy, not just Alberta or Ontario. The whole point of cannabis legalization is to provide safe cannabis at a competitive price so people don't turn into black markets. I mean, you could easily still call the dealer today and have a breadth of a larger variety of products than what you can today get into a legal store. Hopefully that changes in January. It will change.
Sure. But there has been change in it. I mean, if you and I were on the stage in February, we would be talking briefly because it was just we were all tired of talking about it.
I can't wait.
Right?
Can't wait.
Can't wait to be talking about that. And in February, we'll be talking about a whole new assortment that you're going to have to figure out how to planogram.
Totally. So, today it's very, very convenient to call your dealer and still get cannabis at half the price than what you would pay in a legalized, retail recreational location. So I think all of this needs to change. This should be the supreme most element that the government should be looking at. Everything else comes later. And even from a taxation perspective, better roads, like we were discussing earlier. Yeah. Roads, hospitals, all of these tax dollars goes to contributing towards every Canadian's life. So to me, it's a no-brainer. And I think we need to act fast on it. And I hope the government is listening to what needs to be done quickly.
Yeah, I guess I'm sanguine about the opportunity, of course, and we've come a long way in a year and a half. I mean, it really feels like this regaining of the momentum, because there's certainly signs of daylight. As I said, you've got Saskatchewan that has home delivery, you've got Ontario now going to allow click and collect. But let's talk about your enterprise in the context of the future. What's the path ahead, 2020 and beyond? What are you thinking for your organization as all these things kind of smooth out? But what's the future? What's the future of Hightide?
So, Hightide is made of 6 different divisions, but we've always, our legacy business is accessories, which is manufacturing and distribution of smoking accessories. But we were always a retailer first to begin with. We started with the Smoker's Corner business in 2009, built it into 19 stores. My entire vision on Hightide was driven around cannabis retail outlets. So we want to stick to our core, which is being retail focused in 2020. With the advent of the 2.0 products coming in, it's very, very exciting. Every day in our head office, we're getting a whole bunch of new presentations for drinkables, for edibles, for concentrates. And like Adam pointed out, there's so many of the same cartridges. What do you know is best? But what I'm most excited about is that we're probably going to go from 300 SKUs to 700 SKUs overnight.
Wow.
And that equates, in my opinion,
how do you plan on managing that kind of complexity? I mean, the order of magnitude of complexity, just with the people in the store,
right,
doubling your SKU count, then you've just got logistics. We heard earlier in the day, is the fridge behind the wall, is the for drinkables. How do you tackle that from your perspective and your organization's perspective?
So we have the infrastructure now. We've done this for a year now. We've rolled out 29 locations. We have another 10 that we're going to be rolling out very soon. So we know how the concept works. So at this point, it's just fine tuning a little bit. We still need to see how the whole 2.0 plays out. Gratefully and thankfully, our stores are sort of built in a way where we can accommodate. Accessories can take a second seat, and we can accommodate a lot of edibles and drinkables and concentrates. We're yet to see some guidelines to come through for example, where are the drinks going to be stored? Are we going to allow to have a refrigerator in Alberta in our stores? Do we have to put it in the back storage area, cannabis storage area, because we have limited shelf space? So a lot of those things are to be seen, but I think that's the least of our worries. We just want the 2.0 rolled out so we can invite, instead of 11 to 22% of the Canadians converting into the legal market, we get that share to at least 50% and then more beyond into 2020 and 2021. So that initiative is very exciting for me. I think the growing pains will come with that, which is additional staffing. But sure, in a province like Alberta, which is hurting very, very badly today, I think it'll be a very good bump for all of us, and overall for the industry and especially the retail industry as a whole.
So structurally, when you look around the world, I guess when you look south, right? Sometimes I like to look south sometimes and see what's going on in the different states around legalization. Is there anything there that you like, that you might think about adopting? They're a couple of years ahead of us with edibles, right, and they've been doing. I was in a large cannabis store in Las Vegas, and just
Planet
miles.
13?
Planet 13, or just miles and miles of
right,
stuff.
Right.
Just a little overwhelming, actually. But
right,
what do you like when you think about that in your merchandising strategy? Straight to your brand, though, which is simplicity and fun and sophistication. Right. What jumps out at you as something that you adopt or something that you really admire?
The variety. The variety being the biggest factor. You go to Planet 13, like you pointed out, or any other store in Colorado, California, and Vegas, and we look like we are infants, although we are federally legal and they are not. So, when we actually I
heard Sylvain Charlebois, I interviewed him for the podcast, and he said we're first, but we're not leading.
Correct.
From that perspective, right?
Generally we trail United States, and it's okay if we trail, but we need to get this right because the world is watching. And we've not delivered on the expectations that were laid on Canada on how this will be panned out. But 2.0 really differentiates that, that aspect. 2.0 really gives us that chance to showcase to the world that, yes, we've converted over 50% of the black market and converting more every day. To your question of whether we have our eyes set on something in the United States, absolutely. We are looking at the bigger exchanges to list on the bigger exchange. And we were never in favor of doing anything in the United States that not on side with the federal government in the United States. So we want to wait it out. If it takes a year and a half, then it takes a year and a half. There's a lot of work to do in Canada. We want to conquer the home turf first, learn the business in Canada, become a good operator in Canada, become a profitable operator in Canada, and then U.S. is our next market. Eventually we'll get there.
When I think about the future, and I think about a future where you're competing against other cannabis retailers because there's lots of stores. Sometimes I think about how do you overcome, how strong a brand needs to be to overcome just proximity. I'm just going to go to my local store because it's easy to get to versus
Correct.
I'm going to go to the Canna Cabana because I really like the environment. Is that the future that you see? I mean, in a truly competitive world where you're not ostensibly competing less with the legacy market and how do you see that fitting through?
Such an important and relevant question for any retailer. So when I think about that strategy today, if I want to buy anything, I Google, if I want to go eat, in a nice restaurant, I want to eat Italian, what's the highest rated experience in the country? Around me, let's say, for Italian food. It's going to be the same thing for cannabis and for everything else in retail. So Canna Cabana is built around those principles. We want to make sure that our customers become our friends. We can say whoever we want that we are, but it really what your customers are saying is who you really are. And that's why the reviews that we're getting online are very encouraging because our customers are saying these guys know their stuff, they're knowledgeable, they provide a complete experience, we can get anything we want there, we don't have to go to a different store, and we always feel welcomed at that store. So I feel that if we maintain that edge, and no one can take it for granted, none of us retailers can take it for granted, but if we work on maintaining our edge, on whatever our edge is, and in our case it's a friendly atmosphere, it's a one-stop shopping experience, and it's providing that complete experience to the customer. And if you hold on to that edge, I think that's a recipe for success.
So I guess it's a bridge to kind of my last set of questions is looking at 2000, the year past and the year ahead, what are your kind of pieces of advice to anyone who's looking to get into the industry? You've got a vast experience in it from 2009.
Right.
All things being equal, there will be more people interested in getting into the industry in the years to come. What's your advice and how to approach it?
The biggest advice that I can give everyone is do your due diligence. Know what the market size is. KYC, know your customer. All of these things are very, very important. It all seems very rosy and very bright, from a distance. And when you're in the midst of things, you get to realize, there's only 30% gross margins. There was an acute supply shortage. Now there's an acute, oversupply issue. So a lot of these things, you have to be ready and you have to be agile and you have to be adaptive to react to these things. But keep in mind that these things can happen, that not everything goes according to plan. Have a contingency fund and do your due diligence would be my two biggest advices.
We heard the same kind of advice from Jen from Deloitte is that you need to have that kind of backup.
Yes.
In an industry with so much change, you really need to be prepared with a bit of money and keep some money in the background and some funds in the background to get ready for the unpredictable.
Totally. Like in Alberta, we heard that, right now there's 300 stores open in Alberta, and the rollout of these stores, people wanted to, they were ready. They signed up for leases, including ourselves. We're holding on to all these leases, And there's no end in sight when the moratorium would get lifted or anything else. And I heard many stories where people had second mortgaged their house to get that lease in place, to do a build-out. Cannabis build-outs are not cheap. We have 23 cameras in a 1,500 square feet spot, and you can't have a blind spot in that store.
It's like an Amazon Go store. Right?
Just the security is $35,000-$40,000, right? And everything else. So do your due diligence, have a backup plan, have a contingency fund, and be ready to be thrown a curveball at you.
Well, I couldn't think of a better way to kind of wrap up our afternoon today. It's great advice, very hands-on, very practical. I think I'd like to thank you on behalf of everyone for being so open and sharing and for joining me on the stage. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Lauren, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, it's such a treat to meet you. Thanks for coming up from Ottawa. You've got such a great experience. I want to delve into that, your background in retail and such an award-winning sweep Superette hat at the CCA, so we'll get to that. But let's start with a little bit of your personal and professional journey, what you do at Superette, and then a little bit about the retail store itself.
Yeah, you bet. To start, we won't go all the way back, but I've been in retail my whole life. So that started when I was 15. So I won't double click on that. But early days at Club Monaco when Joe Nimram was still at the helm. So I think I share that because that incited my passion for service, beauty of brand, knowing what it's like to be best in class, really inspired me. So knowingly or unknowingly, I can't decide yet, I just stayed in retail. I felt like that was a sweet spot. I thought it was interesting in Canada. And my real career kicked off with Lululemon.
Right.
And so in about 2004, 2005 was when I joined the Lululemon crew.
Interesting times,
times.
Very exciting.
And, I was really blessed to be there pre and post IPO and external investment. And, you learn so much about what it's like to work with a retailer with a really strong culture and culture first.
Yeah.
And that sort of set me off on my journey. Canadian retail really fascinated me because we're such a small playground, and so on one level it's really easy to stand out, and on another level you really have to hustle in a different way than I think you do in a bigger market. And
that's a great point, because one of the misnomers, I was on a U.S. podcast, and one of the misnomers sometimes can be that Canada's less competitive to the States. I said, well, listen, there's a lot of similarities between the two markets, but there's also a lot of differences, and you got to understand the nature of the difference in Canada. Not much margin for error. Super competitive underneath the surface. And it's a market of different scale, right? So
Absolutely.
It's a very different thing.
And it's fun. I mean, it's fun to have a few of the big cities that you get to know really, really well, opposed to having 30. So I enjoyed playing in that sort of backyard, so to speak. So from Lululemon, I moved over to David's Tea, another growing Canadian retailer. At David's Tea was quite big in the east of Canada. I don't think as much at the west at the time. But what I learned at David's Tea was operational excellence through and through. The exposure I had to the beauty of operations and how that can impact job love. It impacts scale, and it overall just impacts the way you can grow. So that was a big learning and takeaway at David's Tea. And I think most notably and most recently, I was senior director with Sage. So when I joined Sage, we were 13 units. And by the time I left, we were at about just over 70 units.
What three brands that just suddenly had this geometric growth?
Right? Yeah. It was. I've been really blessed, and I've been really inspired by brands based in the Canadian landscape looking to grow. And so that really drew me to Sage, and I still believe in their products and their mission and what they're up to. And so, when I left Sage, cannabis came calling, and I was quite resistant, to be honest. I thought it's the Wild West.
Bit of leap of faith, right?
Leap of faith, and would tie into sort of, again, this growth culture in the Canadian market, first to market, really exciting. But it was really Superette that inspired me, not just any retailer. And I really believed in the vision of Superette. I loved some of the experience that Drummond and Mimi brought to the table. And I just loved the vision. I loved that we wanted to do something different. We wanted to go lo-fi when others were going hi-fi. We wanted to go warm and friendly and nostalgic when others were going futuristic and Apple Store. There's nothing wrong with that, but it just at the time...
Just not the vibe? You had a different vibe, right?
Different vibe. And so at Superette, I'm our head of retail. It's not necessarily indicative of what I do. We're still a small company, so, of course, overseeing our sales, our retail unit, our people.
And deep experience in education, so I couldn't think of a better place for such an important role. Right?
Yeah, no, it's been great. And then, the real exciting part for me in this role is overseeing product and product buying and some product development.
That's a non-traditional role.
That's right.
You're not an ops person. You're a merchant. You're in-store merchandising. A little bit of unpack Superette for me. Tell me what is that brand, and for those listeners who don't know it, know of it, tell me more about Superette.
Yeah, you bet. So Superette is a nod to the term of bodega or corner store. So that's really what inspired our co-founders, Drummond and Mimi. The vision was to create a retail experience within the cannabis market that you could liken to stopping off at your corner store. Joe the clerk at the counter who knows your order. The idea was to create something regular. That's something so not in the norm of how we shop today.
Right. The Kim's convenience of cannabis, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that was really the vision for Superette. We have one retail unit currently
in Ottawa.
In Ottawa.
My hometown.
Is that your hometown?
It's my hometown.
Yeah. So we love Ottawa, and our office is here in Toronto.
Okay.
So there's a few of us based here in Toronto, but our retail team, is based in Ottawa in the Wellington West neighborhood.
Right on.
Ottawa has been a wonderful community to explore recreational cannabis because I think that Ottawa's done just a great job of supporting the retail market in cannabis.
Proximity to the Quebec market, which is what it is also probably a little bit helpful. It's funny. It's the reverse flow. When I was growing up in Ottawa, it was the race for the border for the 3 a.m. Drinking. 1 a.m. Let's go.
That's right.
Now it's something different.
Now
right?
it's the reverse.
It's funny. Now it's reverse. So at the recent Lift & Co. had their Canadian Cannabis Awards. And you guys swept it, basically. But I wanted to talk about one element. I think you won Bud Tender and then the concept. So I wanted to talk about, I heard it on the stage, the secret sauce of why you won for Best Retail Format. And then I want to get into Bud Tenders and what you look for.
Sure.
Tell me about that a bit.
Yeah, sure. We were just so committed to doing something different. And what I want to say is high water floats all boats. And so right now, in my opinion, the cannabis industry is high water. And so that's not a pun. That's just,
Let's not get into the weeds here. I could do this all day.
All day. But what I mean by that is it can be hard to differentiate yourself in a market that is so exciting. It's very appealing. It's new. It's sexy. It's vibrant.
At the same time, we all face the same regulations. So there's a narrow lane within which you can travel.
That's right. And there's areas of gray. And so to be a master of operating in the gray, I think is truly important in the retail sector.
Interesting.
But to get back to your question around sort of secret sauce and what it was, I mean, first and foremost, I'm grateful to represent the brand today, but it's really the people. We did, I think, a really great job of hiring people that were committed to excellence in the recreational market, passionate not only about the market, but about what Superette was up to. So about creating that warmth, that friendly atmosphere, frictionless experience as much as possible, and have fun. There's lots of regulation. It's, as you mentioned, it can be quite narrow. And so we were really committed to finding the right people first.
Take me through how you eliminated friction within your store. What do you mean by that?
Sure.
Like tactically, what did you do to eliminate that?
Yeah, so, you definitely experiment, but we really had to look at deploying, not in a typical retail format of how we sectioned off our floor. So everyone as a host, you check IDs, but we quickly learned we needed 2 people at the front. So we wanted a host, then we wanted someone to help direct the experience.
Okay.
So that's one minor example that makes a big impact.
Right from the jump off, right as you cross the door.
Yeah, it was pretty visible that we needed help to direct people because it was becoming complex how people were going to shop, right? The second thing is having sort of like in a restaurant, an expediter. So you have someone checking the orders, making sure that every order going out to someone is perfect. Yes, there's a margin of error for sure, but you quickly have to use your human capital to create an ease of experience for your people. This is a volume game, and so quite different from a Lululemon or a Sage, where it's all about spending as much time as possible with a guest.
Get that dwell time up and get them up.
That's right, get that basket up.
Yeah.
This has been quite different for me in that you really want the volume. So you want to spend time with people and educate them efficiently. And so right now, it's our challenge. And so how do we do that for ease of use, make it fun, educate, and still allow for the volume to take place?
It's the art and science of retail, right? How to make people feel welcome, not rushed, but, kind of move them through, right?
Yeah, right? That's right.
Busy store, I'm sure.
Yeah, very busy.
Keep busy. Let's talk about training for a bit. So
sure, yeah.
Everyone has to do the Lift & Co. kind of standard training, but what do you do over and above that for your people? Would you call them bud tenders?
We call them bud tenders.
Okay, bud tenders. Okay.
Yeah. So we have a 2-day sort of immersive brand training program that we developed internally. So on top of the CanSell certification, we developed an internal training program to support understanding of the brand, values, culture. Yeah. Of course, we deep dive into flower education, methods of consumption, safe consumption, and then the experience. So that's a huge pillar of ours. So there's role play and all the different roles that I mentioned that fit into the store. Yeah. What does that look like? Especially if you're coming from a retailer service background, this is going to be a very unique experience as a bud tender.
And I can see the Davids and the Sage experience in the way you're speaking, because they're both sensory experiences, right?
Yes.
Sage, very much so. The whole environment is a sensory experience, which is part of what's made it successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about a David's tea, there's a tea bar. And that immediately can look like a barrier. It can be a barrier to contact, a barrier to education. And so what was interesting is we have some people on our team from David's Tea, and that we could really move easily around because there was a ease of use around that. Right. So how quickly can you overcome that barrier? Don't let that, bud tender bar or bud bar get in the way of how you connect with people. Right. Super important. This is going to be new for a lot of people. And to get back to, what you mentioned around top bud tender, you can have people who love the product but don't necessarily want to educate everyone who's new to the industry. Yeah. On the converse, you can have people who love service and love education but aren't that jazzed up about flower and methods of consumption. And I think every retailer will have that opportunity to blend both. Yeah. And we just, we were really committed to finding great people who had both early on.
It's interesting. I run into, and I go through a lot of cannabis stores just to experience, amongst other things, the way that people sell. So some are very technical sell. Let's dive into the terpenes. And
yes.
Here's the entourage effect, and let me help you understand that. Now others are just like, tell me what kind of experience you're looking for, right? And I guess, do you take a position on that, or is it just, let's discover what the consumer's looking for and try to gauge, are they looking to understand terpenes better than strains, or are they just saying, listen, I just want a pre-roll, I just want to have a good time tonight, or I want to whatever. Do you guys take a position, or do you follow that?
Yeah.
Just let the customer lead, I guess.
Yeah, that's a cool question. I would say we let the customer lead. Our training is really customer focused. So by that, I mean, we want the customer to lead, even if they're, saying something to the effect of, I've never been, in a cannabis store before, I've never smoked weed before. that gives us a great jumping off point.
Sure.
And, that was also a tenant principle of educate. It's similar to like go low and slow. Educate slowly and let them signal if they want more. It is easy to overwhelm.
That's tricky, right? I was just going to say, I was in a store in Vegas.
Yeah.
A big superstore.
Oh, yeah.
And right away, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. And right away they went to very technical stuff about terpenes, and my head was just spinning.
Yeah.
It was spinning a little bit before I got there.
I was going to ask,
Yeah, then it was spinning a lot after. And it was just like, okay, next person, because I realized kind of left me a little bit behind. It's interesting. Kind of last couple of questions.
Sure.
In your experience, what is it going to take to be successful? Top couple of things to be successful in 2020 and beyond. We've been hearing at the conference here, the Retail Cannabis Forum. We're here in the Environics podcasting studio here. We're talking about all these new products coming on board. Cannabis 2.0 from shatter to drinkables. So it gets more complex, not less. What's it going to take to be successful in 2020 and beyond?
Yeah, a lot. I could narrow it down to 3 or 4 pieces. As you alluded to, 2020 is going to be cool with, 2.0 in the sense of edibles, beverages, concentrates being available. So as a retailer, you of course want to arm your team with the education, with the knowledge, with your design up front, and with your operational excellence and how you're going to deliver those products into the consumer's bag. I think that's going to be really important. I think the second thing is getting really clear what sets your brand apart. As Ontario in particular will most likely see many more stores, let's hope, on the horizon.
Let's hope it's when, not if, right?
That's right. It will soon start to be about where do the customers want to shop versus where do they have to shop.
Yeah.
And so knowing what sets your brand apart, and this is what I'm alluding to with the high water. Because right now, I think you can open your doors and you know what, frankly, weed sells. I think pretty soon the consumer is going to catch on to what experience they like, who has the product selection I like, and what's the vibe I'm looking for.
And I guess it's going to become, like traditional retail in some ways. You're going to need people to decide to go out of their way to a particular format.
That's right.
In the fullness of time, right?
Yep.
I mean, some do today just because of the lack of stores, but, as opposed to defaulting to the one that's in my neighborhood and I'm just going to go buy the product, right? That'll be sounds like the real battleground to me in the future to come, right?
That's what I think, and I think to be more proactive in thinking that way as a retailer and be competitive in that space is going to be, I think will show who the winners are.
Right on.
And I think, lastly, the buying mix is going to be very important. We've seen some data in the States. Whether or not we can apply that to Canada, who knows?
Yeah.
But the buying mix is going to be pretty important. The OCS has many, many SKUs available, and understanding what sells, at what cost, and who your customers are, and why are they buying what they're buying is going to be incredibly vital to success in the next year.
It sounds like retail, and it sounds like you've been doing this for quite a while with great expertise, so I couldn't think of anybody better to arm the folks at Superette.
Oh, thank you.
You have one store today, a couple I think I saw on your site on the drawing board, and then more stores in general when possible.
Yes, that's the goal.
So if people want to find out more about you or find out more about Superette, where do they go?
Yeah, more about Superette. Instagram, that way you get a real visual hit of the brand. So at Superette_shop.
Yep.
So it's super and then ETTE_shop. Our website is also fun to check out with some pictures. And for me, I love LinkedIn. That's where I like to play.
Well, thanks so much for joining The Voice of Retail. Real pleasure to meet you. Thanks again for joining us here, and safe travels, and I look forward to experiencing the store myself very soon.
Excellent. We can't wait to have you. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Michelle, welcome back to The Voice of Retail. Not your first visit with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing just great. Well, it's glad to attend the event today and to hear the speakers on all of the changes going on in cannabis and see the implications for retail stores.
So we're here in the Environics Analytics podcasting studio at the Retail Council of Canada's Retail Cannabis Forum. So tell us, first of all, for the listeners who may have not heard our earlier discussions, a little bit about yourself and what you do, just to give us some background.
So my background, I'm Senior Vice President and Practice Leader at Environics Analytics, working with our retail, real estate, and entertainment clients, and obviously cannabis is part of that, to help with store locations, understanding customer profiles, with the wealth of data that we have around demographics, lifestyle, expenditures. And specifically in this case, we have a lot of information about cannabis usage based on results before legalization and then post-legalization. So we've got some way to understand how the markets are changing as retail stores are added, as the producers are getting production on stream, and how consumers are reacting to all of that.
Well, I really want to dig into that because that was my first question: is what does Environics Analytics have in the cannabis space? And you have a specific product because you're so well known and have depth of expertise into geolocating and pulling together a lot of data for location. That's at least one part that we've talked about before. But tell me more about the cannabis product. What do you look at, and what insights? What's the type of insights that you have that you can provide?
So this is Cannabis Insights. We have worked with Vividata right down to the local neighborhood level in order to be able to provide information on consumer attitudes, usage, their future expectations at that local level. So for 44,000 neighborhoods across Canada, we've got an estimate of how many cannabis users there are for recreational purposes, as well as for wellness and health types of applications.
Oh, so you actually know down to the postal code, and you can kind of extrapolate that closely, right?
Yes.
So and you mentioned before and after legalization. So tell me a little bit about that. What have you learned, or what can you share about your insights that you've done in the work before and post legalization?
Well, we've certainly seen a lot of change in the attitude. Pre-legalization, obviously there was a stigma that was associated. We've seen that those types of fears significantly allayed since legalization. So we can see that across most age groups, most income levels, most educational levels across the board. So we can see that the public has a higher comfort level, certainly now than they did, that they are becoming educated, that they've got a better balance on concerns going forward. But we also have that detail on different consumer types, what interests they have. So certainly there's a lot of interest and curiosity. There's a lot of interest specifically in medicinal types of applications and across a wider swath of the population than I think we would have anticipated previously.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, is kind of what surprised you or what jumps out at you in the data that you saw. And right there, that's an interesting insight. So share a bit more about that.
So when we look at the seniors population, obviously not all seniors are the same, but when we look at seniors that live in towns and in rural Canada, we find there's a very strong interest in medicinal applications and the willingness to experiment more so than we would have expected. We would have thought they would have lagged the rest of the market, but post-legalization, we can see that they definitely are starting to approach that, become more educated, look for sources of information, and try to find a solution above and beyond, and just having more options available to them to solve their health issues.
I mean, intuitively, it makes sense to me because as I visit cannabis stores around the country, you might have the same experience. I see people of all ages in those stores. Some, I think, do you parse in terms of CBD and THC, or do you parse that in that kind of detail, or are they just looking for solutions in the general category?
So the questions are more around the benefit that the person is
so their
hoping
objective,
to reach.
What they're looking for.
Exactly.
Right.
Because sometimes some consumers are still concerned about the terms, but certainly they understand, I want to use this for fun, or I want to use this to be able to socialize more easily, or I want to relieve my stress and anxiety. Certainly within the health and wellness category, I mean, the anxiety and stress issue comes up within that category, certainly, but also the pain relief aspect. And so the separation between chronic pain versus more severe pain around a specific injury, there's certainly a lot of interest in that potential by different consumer groups, and especially more openness within the seniors population than we would have expected.
Oh, interesting. So let's unpack how retailers then are using your information and what they're doing with it, because I think having you on the podcast just opens our minds to the data that's available. But do you have any examples or ideas about how retailers are using your data and what kind of decisions they're making with the data that you can provide them?
So I'll speak more generally to begin with and then talk a little bit about the cannabis side of it. So in general, retailers use Environics Analytics to help with who's my best customer, where do I find more like them, to also look at the category in which they play, their competitive set, to say how can I build on my market share, what do I need to do to be able to expand that total potential. So we do a lot of work with segmenting the audiences, showing how the volumes of each of those segments at the very local level, so that when a retailer is looking at their retail stores, they don't have to treat them all the same. They can start to customize the merchandise mix based on the local environment and the types of consumers that are likely, that are in very close proximity to those stores, and better position a very localized experience to that audience.
I've used your data in trying to articulate in another context, since it extrapolates over to this one, kind of e-commerce and grocery shopping, e-commerce grocery, that you've got some neighborhoods and some clusters or segments or cohorts that are just not interested in it at all, but they're interested in every other commodity. And so that allows you to understand, if I'm going to open a retail store, how important is it to have the following services or not?
Yes.
And I guess that carries over in its way to what products you're going to carry and where, I guess, to locate your store. And now, of course, in the retail cannabis space, there's a bunch of other regulations about where you're going to locate. This seems like it would help in terms of figuring out where you're going to locate your retail location. Is that what you're hearing? So
the same type of information that we have in broader retailer, we now have for the cannabis category. So we can say in this local market, this specific site that's under consideration, this is really a recreational type of consumer that's in that local market, whereas this other store, it is totally about the health and wellness category that's really going to resonate with them. So that's going to change that customer experience in the way you train your sales staff in order to understand that local market and to be able to relate to those different consumers in those different retail contexts. It also helps with the broader types of operational training and deployment so that you've got the right mix across the staff overall.
You know, all day today we've heard different brands, Westleaf, we heard Hightide and their Canna Cabana concept. What strikes me is each of them have a different approach. Generally, they're looking for the canna curious or cannabis consumer. But it's interesting because I think your data could help profile like a Canna Cabana who's looking for, the more sociable, the kind of that it would help them cluster their stores even in the right location. Not even just the principle of how they're going to sell, but where to locate their stores and where not to locate their stores, I guess, right?
So there was a lot of discussion today around the, as you say, the kind of curious. So the those that are new to the, even to an experimentation or even investigation.
Yeah.
And that represents, it's in the double-digit category.
Oh, wow.
That opportunity. So it's certainly big enough, and there's certainly a lot of interest across the industry in that segment. We do have the data to show which consumers those are by lifestyle type. We use our PRISM system with 68 lifestyle types to be able to show where that segment of the population lives and what their characteristics are. So, what kind of life stage are they at? What lifestyle do they have? Yeah. How do they entertain and how do they purchase in general? And then specifically, what forms of cannabis are they potentially under consideration? So whether that is vaping, whether it's edibles, whether it's looking for those that full range of options.
Such an important question as we look at Cannabis 2.0 and as we look at 2020. It's a good segue into one of my last questions is thinking ahead to 2020. What advice do you have to retailers based on what you've seen? And I guess that is helping them understand their assortment. We heard Raj Grover from Hightide talk about going to 700 SKUs. Mm-hmm. It sounds like your data would help retailers like Raj figure out what to carry when and what the priority is, right?
Yeah, it can be used to figure out what that mix should look like, to understand also the existing customers for each brand. So each individual brand can use our information to understand what part of the market do they really play in very well. Where do they see that initial uptake? So using just the postal code, a privacy-friendly way to be able to have some existing consumer loyalty data, for instance.
Yep.
It can then be tagged to information on the social values of those consumers. So what attitudes do they have in general? Are they looking for novelty of experience? Do they want to hear a whole brand story? What are the motivations for them specifically around cannabis? Is it health and wellness, or is it more of a social, and is it just looking to have fun more on an individual basis? So that full spectrum of the reasons why people are looking into this and understanding that segment of the market so that they've got a better idea of how to do the education, do the training of their staff, so that they've got the best relevance in all of their dealings with that consumers.
Boy, I really see how this data could really inform a lot of the discussions that we had today. So, it's been great having you back on the podcast. I look forward to every time I learn something new every time, so it's great to chit and chat with you again. So once again, thanks for being on The Voice of Retail. And for my listeners out there, how do they get in touch with you, learn more about Environics Analytics?
So I'd be happy to speak to anyone by phone. My direct line's 416-969-2760. Or there's a lot of information on our website, www.environicsanalytics.com.
Very good. Well, thanks again for joining me on The Voice of Retail, and I wish you a great week. Well, that's a wrap on this special Retail Cannabis Forum edition of The Voice of Retail. Thanks to Raj, Lauren, and Michelle for being my guests, and Environics Analytics for being my sponsor. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on www.emmyleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.